this is Built with Barrett at CorkSport Mazda Performance, and in this video we're going to break down a high pressure fuel pump housing and its internals to show how to clean and replace with E85 safe O-rings and replacement filters. So before we get into the breakdown of the high pressure fuel pump, let's look over the tools that we're going to need to get the fuel pump out of the vehicle and then do the breakdown and the cleaning procedure. If you're looking for step-by-step install instructions and removal instructions for the high pressure fuel pump housing, check out the description below for a link to the high pressure fuel pump internals install instructions, which will give you step-by-step install and removal of the housing itself. So starting from the right here, our tools to actually get the high pressure fuel pump housing out of the vehicle. We have our E8 torx bit. We have a 19mm wrench, 17mm wrench, and a flathead screwdriver. Then looking at the tools more specific to the high pressure fuel pump rebuild, we have a hook pick, a straight pick, we have angled tweezers, straight tweezers, an assortment of 1/4 inch and 3/8 inch ratchets. And then for the sockets, we have a 1/4 inch socket here for a tool that comes in the high pressure fuel pump rebuild kit from CorkSport. We have a 9mm socket, a deep 18mm socket, and then a 4mm Allen. Along with that is going to be an adjustable wrench or an 1.25 inch wrench, vice grips, Q-tips for cleaning, brake clean for cleaning, and clean new oil for relubricating the O-rings as we do the install. Other parts or tools that would be useful is a vise to hold the high pressure fuel pump housing while you do so, and of course, clean rags, gloves, and safety equipment. We will want a torque wrench. This is a little overkill. A 3/8 torque wrench will also do the job for you. Before we split open the high pressure fuel pump housing and internals, let's check out what comes in the CorkSport high pressure fuel pump rebuild kit. So in the kit, we have 4 smaller Allen head bolts here. These replace the hardware for the mechanical damper and the fuel feed and return. Then we have 3 larger Allen head bolts here. These are actually to mount the pump into the vehicle. And then you'll see that there are 2 tools, if you will. We have a safety torx bit. This will be needed to remove the hardware from the mechanical damper and the feed and return. And then we have a number 12 screw here. This is used to remove the filters in the high pressure fuel pump and the pressure relief valve. Then of course we have our O-ring kits. We have a spill valve internal and external here, our fuel feed and return, the mechanical damper, high pressure fuel pump housing, the piston X-ring, the piston housing seal screw, and lastly, the fuel feed and pressure relief valve filters. First, we're going to remove the piston and seal screw assembly. You can see that we have some fuel, definitely some black stuff inside there. Next, we're going to remove the mechanical damper assembly. And here we'll be using the provided safety torx bit. So we'll want our 1/4 inch socket, torx bit. These tend to be pretty tight and tend to strip. So with this bit, you want to make sure that you have the bit pretty well inserted and straight in here before trying to really remove it. We may find that we need to use the, well, don't need to use the vise here. So I broke one loose. Broke both of them loose. So you're gonna notice some resistance and the diaphragm, mechanical diaphragm actually pushing out a bit. That's due to a spring that is inside this assembly. Okay, so hardware is removed. So we're gonna pull this assembly out. If it's a little difficult to pull out due to the O-ring sticking, you can use a flathead screwdriver and lightly twist to break it free. So we have our outer damper. We have an inner assembly in here that you can see. So you can use a pick tool, you could use tweezers here instead of sticking your finger in there so that you guys can see. So here is our wave spring. So I just dumped that out here. So we have our outer assembly that we will take apart for the cleaning in just a bit. We have our wave spring that keeps tension on the assembly. And then we have a washer, the damper itself, and then an outer ring that keeps everything aligned when inside the pump. So next, we are going to remove the spill valve assembly. This has multiple pieces that will be pulled out, and there are 3 very small and precise pieces inside the housing that will be free to fall out when we pull this assembly out. So I want you to be cautious about not losing those, because if they get loose onto the floor, very likely they're gonna disappear. So we got it in the vise here. The vise jaws are clamping on the side of the housing and the side of the feed and return fitting. There's a nice square face there, so this has a pretty good grip to hold it. So there will be some resistance due to the O-ring inside, so you may need to use the tool to fully loosen the part. Before you take the seal screw out, go back to your clean surface due to the small components inside here. Using the provided security bit, again, we'll use a 1/4 inch socket, a ratchet to remove the security bits from the feed and return fitting. So again, you want to make sure it's fully in there. If there's any debris inside here, make sure it's cleaned out before doing this. So we're going to remove the feed and return fitting here using our provided security bit, 1/4 inch socket, and ratchet. So this will now spin freely. There's just a very small, simple O-ring in here. So you'll just want to pull that out. And now we have basically fully disassembled the high pressure fuel pump housing. So we'll set that to the side. There is some cleaning we will be doing. There's some O-rings that we will be replacing. We'll cover that in just a bit. Now looking at our feed and return here, you can see that we actually have a very small filter inside. And this is actually an injector filter basket that we will be replacing. So we're gonna start going through and cleaning each component. So I'm gonna show cleaning the housing itself, replacing the O-ring, and then we will do that with each subsystem of the high pressure fuel pump. And then we'll put those back into the high pressure fuel pump as we go. That way we don't lose parts or mix up O-rings or anything like that. So you'll see that we have a box here. This is a great way to contain the spray from brake clean and what other cleaning you do. That way everything goes inside the box, the debris, moisture, whatnot. And then when you're done, you just throw the box away. So first off, we are going to remove the O-ring. So I'm using my pick tool here to pick and pull the O-ring out. So we'll throw that to the side. We're not using that anymore. You can see there is actually some black residue and whatnot behind the O-ring. So now that we have cleaned the housing itself, we're gonna install this O-ring. Before we do that, I'm gonna show you a little trick on how to lubricate the O-ring, and we will do this going forward. So we have our clean engine oil. We just need just a tiny bit inside the cap here. We're not trying to put a bunch of oil everywhere, but we are going to use this oil as a basic lubricant for the O-ring so that the install process is simplified. So just a little dab, just enough to basically coat the O-ring here. We just cleaned our high pressure fuel pump, so we don't want to get it any more oily than necessary. So you just want to put that over the edge, just work it around, and then there we go, we have our O-ring installed. Okay, so working backwards from the way that we tore down the high pressure fuel pump assembly, we are going to go through and rebuild our feed and return fittings here. So first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna remove this filter. To do that, we're going to use our number 12 screw that was provided in the CorkSport kit, and our flathead screwdriver to essentially screw this into the filter. So this filter inside here is a plastic that eventually will degrade due to E85 use. It's pressed in, that's the only thing holding it in place. So with this number 12 screw, we want to thread it in just a bit to get a grip. And then we are going to use our vice grips. Okay, once you have the vice grip on the screw and the screw is threaded into the filter basket, you're gonna want to basically try to break it loose, and then you're gonna pull it out. And so what you should see is, mainly an intact filter basket, possibly yours is damaged. But this is just part of the filter basket piece. So you have a plastic kind of neck here with your filter. And so what you'll see left over is a brass collar inside of your feed and return fitting here. So we'll want to remove the filter basket plastic part off the screw here. Probably leave this on your vice grips, and you're going to want to screw into the brass itself. And if you can get in there far enough, it may grip and pull it out. If not, I'll show you another technique that can work to get this brass collar out. Okay, so for demonstration, I took the brass collar off. I pushed it back in here to show you the other way that you can remove this with a pick, or possibly real fine point needle nose pliers if you feel like that's a better leverage point for you, or you're struggling with the pick. You want to get the tip of the pick in here, and you'll notice that we kind of find an edge. That's the lower edge of that brass bushing or collar. So you want to get in there, get up against that edge, and then you'll want to kind of like leverage it out, and you should be able to basically angle and pull it out of the inside of your fitting here. Here we're going to install our new stainless steel filter basket into our feed and return fitting. So this is a injector filter basket is the technical term. Obviously this is not an injector, but this is what's used in this fitting by Mazda. You can see we got a small brass crush collar. So this will actually crush into here just a little bit and hold it in place. And replacing the plastic mesh screen, we have a stainless steel mesh here. So this won't degrade over time with the E85. So with the basket facing down, you want to set that in there. Kind of get it halfway pressed in with your finger, and then you'll want to move over to a flatter surface. Next, we're going to install our fuel feed and return O-ring. So again, we'll take a just a small amount of oil. We basically just want to put a very fine coating on here. And voila, all done. Okay, so we have reassembled our feed and return pipe. So we're gonna press that into the high pressure fuel pump housing. We wanna move it around just a little, make sure nothing is stuck. And then here we were going to use the provided hardware from the CorkSport kit. So we'll wanna hand thread these into the high pressure fuel pump housing first. And then once they're hand tight, we're going to use our 4mm Allen and ratchet to get these screws snug to about 5 foot-pounds. And once the screws are hand tight, we'll use our 4mm Allen and ratchet. And we want to get these snug but not overly tight. About 5 foot-pounds is going to be plenty tight to keep our assembly together. Next, we are going to take the spill valve assembly here and we're going to fully disassemble it, remove the O-rings, go through the cleaning process, and then reassemble. So the first process is you're gonna take your 9mm socket here, and you're gonna wanna line the top of the socket up with the top of the spill valve. So there's this round section here, that lines up with the top here. Because what we do next, push down on this outer section here with the large hex and exposed threads. So we're gonna wanna hold on to this threaded and large hex section and push down until small half circle cert clips are exposed and loose. So we've now pushed it down. You'll feel kind of a pop as it breaks loose from the inner O-ring, and you'll see that these cert clips are now loose to come out. So I want to take them both out. So both our cert clips, they're the same piece, they just get used in unison. So you'll notice that there is one design on this end, a different design on this end. That's so that when these come together on the spill valve assembly, they interlock with each other. So now that we've broke that loose, you'll want to basically not really push on this little pin in the center. Try to avoid that. You want to push on the edge here. We'll get our socket again. So you can see that this is just an assembly piece, and now we have another exposed O-ring that we'll replace, and we can clean this internal structure as well. So we're gonna remove the spill valve external O-ring. Now we have the internal spill valve assembly and the internal spill valve O-ring. Sometimes a trick is to try to pinch the O-ring, then you can get in there and easily hook it. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Now technically, this assembly and internal structure here can come out and be disassembled. For the sake of simplicity and not breaking a very expensive and complicated system, we're gonna try to basically spray it out and clean as best as we can, obviously the outside surface, but we will not be showing how to break this down further. So in our situation, our grooves here are being a little more difficult than a simple microfiber rag can handle. So I'm actually going to get in here with the Q-tip and try to really force it into the grooves here to get that black residue off. Next up are our shirt clips here. We just simple spray brake clean, get the big stuff off of them. And then we have our internal pieces with the spill valve. Now these are a bit more precise, definitely some little nooks and crannies here. So go ahead and spend some time really trying to get into these with the Q-tip. So lastly, with the spring here, because this is such a delicate item, I'm not really gonna scrub it, but I am just gonna kind of spray it down with some brake clean. That should get any major stuff off of it. Like I said, being so delicate, if I try to scrub it with a Q-tip or the rag here, I may damage it, and that's gonna be far worse than a little bit of black residue on the coil. So here we're gonna show installing our internal O-ring, our external O-ring, and then we'll put the assembly back together, and then we'll take that whole spill valve assembly and put it into our housing. So we'll take our O-rings out here. Make sure to keep yourself organized. You don't want to get things mixed up doing this process. We're gonna take our outer fitting, we'll grab our oil here. We want, again, just enough to coat this O-ring. And then we're going to press this O-ring down around our outer fitting. Get our O-ring nicely set in that groove there. Then we'll move over to our internal. You probably already have enough oil on your fingers already to get this lubricated. And then again, we're gonna thread it over the fitting. Make sure you get it fully into that groove, just like so. So you'll notice that these clips are still loose, but they can't fall out anymore. When you actually install this into the housing, it's going to pull everything tight and in place. Okay, so we're gonna take our spring and place that into the retainer for the spill valve small components. And then we're gonna take our tappet here. We want the flat side facing up. And we're gonna set that down over the spring inside the retainer. We wanna check that it moves freely. Then we're gonna take the entire assembly and place that into the high pressure fuel pump housing. We found that doing this on the bench and then putting the entire assembly in the housing is actually much easier than putting each component in individually. So now we're going to take the assembled spill valve and we're going to hand thread that into the high pressure fuel pump housing. You're going to notice a little bit of resistance once you get down to the O-ring. Get this on as far as you can, and then you'll want to use your crescent wrench to fully tighten this down into the housing. So a detail we want to point out is the orientation of the electrical connector on the spill valve. We'll want to make sure to clock this into the proper location so it hooks up to the wiring harness. So you can see here it's in line with where the high pressure fuel pump housing goes into the engine block. So that needs to be rotated back slightly so that when we fully tighten the screw, it'll end up in the right position. So you want to get this spill valve assembly fairly tight, but not overly tight, and verify that the connector is lined up. Next, we are going to fully disassemble the outer mechanical damper assembly. So you'll notice that there's a small slot. We're going to use this slot and a flathead screwdriver to pry it apart, and then we can fully clean the internal surfaces. So we've popped that loose, and then we can take out our components. So we have a retaining ring, the damper itself, and the outer housing. So we're going to take all these components, go over to our cleaning box, and proceed with cleaning with our Q-tips and microfiber towel and brake clean. Next, we are going to assemble our outer mechanical damper assembly. So we're going to install the damper itself and then the retaining ring. So we'll want to press in the retaining ring by hand just enough to hold it, and then flip it over and use a hard flat surface to press the retaining ring and damper fully in. So you'll notice that there is an outer edge on the retaining ring. You'll want to make sure that that is flush with the housing edge. With that assembled, we're going to install our mechanical damper O-ring. So again, we'll use fresh engine oil to lightly lubricate the O-ring, and then we'll thread that over the housing into the groove. So next, we are going to assemble the mechanical dampers components directly in the high pressure fuel pump housing. So first we'll install the stepped ring, then the mechanical damper, the retaining ring, and the wave spring. So now we can install the outer mechanical damper. The open slot, we want to make sure that this is facing away from the feed and return fittings when we install this in the housing. And again, we will replace the OE hardware with the provided hardware from the CorkSport kit. So we'll want to hand thread these in, get them snug, and then we'll use our 4mm Allen and ratchet to slowly thread this down step by step on each side. You'll notice that there's a slot, and this is the wave spring holding the outer mechanical damper assembly out. So use the 4mm Allen to loosely tighten one side, then go to the next side, snug this up, and then you can fully tighten both screws. Again, We want these snug, about 5 foot-pounds. So next, we are going to disassemble the seal screw and high pressure fuel pump piston. First, we're going to remove the collar, and then we're going to press the piston fully into the seal screws so that we can gain access to the tappet and retainer. So with this, we're showing how to use a flathead screwdriver to gently loosen the tappet from the retainer. Next, we're going to pull the piston out of the seal screw and the spring off the seal screw, and then we can go over to our cleaning and clean and remove the O-rings from the seal screw housing. So now we're going to clean the seal screw and the high pressure fuel pump internals. So we're going to remove the outer O-ring, and then we're going to use tweezers or a pick tool to remove the internal X-ring. Once those are removed, we can go through and clean these components using our Q-tip, brake clean, and microfiber towel. We're also going to clean the piston itself to remove any of that film. And we want to be clean and gentle in this process because the piston has very high tolerances that need to be kept. So next, we're going to install our X-ring and our piston housing seal screw O-ring. Again, we want to use fresh engine oil to lightly lubricate both the X-ring and the outer O-ring. So when installing the X-ring, you want to pinch it into a U or oblong shape. Press it into the housing and then gently use a pick tool to hold the pressed in edge of the X-ring in the groove in the housing, and then use your finger to press the other end of the X-ring in, and it should snap into place. Visually inspect it and make sure it is actually in the groove inside the housing. Then we will install our outer O-ring like all other outer O-rings. We just want to get that into the slot. So now we are going to reassemble our seal screw and high pressure fuel pump internals. So we're going to lubricate the piston with fresh engine oil. We will install the piston collar. And then we will press the piston shaft into the housing of the seal screw. And you'll notice a little bit of resistance getting the piston shaft through the X-ring. So you'll see a bit of a snap into place. This is okay. We just want to make sure that the piston can move freely in the X-ring. So then we'll install our spring and then reinstall the tappet and retainer. So with CorkSport high pressure fuel pump internals, we recommend using the provided tool that came with your internals. So you'll hang it in the tool and in the aluminum pipe that allows the whole assembly to hang in place. And then you're going to use the butt of a screwdriver to basically knock the tappet back down. So we want to make sure that the tappet is pressed fully down on the high pressure fuel pump internals shaft of the piston. Then we'll take that assembly and thread that into the high pressure fuel pump housing using the 18mm deep socket and a torque wrench. You'll want to set this up in the vise and torque this to 40 foot-pounds. Lastly, there are 3 long Allen head screws that are provided in the CorkSport kit. Those are used to reinstall the high pressure fuel pump housing into the engine. Now for the second filter, again, we're going to use our number 12 screw and thread that into the pressure relief valve that can be found on the fuel rail. So you want to thread that into the filter enough to get a strong bite, and then use vice grips or a vise to pull that filter and collar out. So with the new filter, you want to set that in filter first, press it in by hand, and then use a flat hard surface to fully press that into the pressure relief valve. So that concludes the tutorial of rebuilding your high pressure fuel pump kit with the CorkSport O-ring and filter rebuild. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was informative and helped you get through the job easily. So we're gonna get this back in the car and we're gonna get this car back home. So thank you for tuning in with Built with Barrett at CorkSport Mazda Performance. Make sure to stay in the know, subscribe, check out the blog for other information.